He didn't hesitate. That was the part that would haunt Amara Brooks for the rest of her life. Not the words he said, not the glass that shattered against the marble wall, not even the way his face went cold like a door swinging shut. It was that he didn't hesitate. Chairman Kong Se-jin had walked into that hospital room 15 years ago, laid a fabricated medical report on a grieving boy's chest, and looked him straight in the eyes without a single tremor in his hand. He had stolen a man's entire future, his bloodline, his fatherhood, every child that would never be born, and he had done it without blinking. And tonight, that lie was about to collide with the truth Amara had been carrying for 4 months. If you were standing where she stood, cold rain soaking through your coat, your heart hammering so hard you could feel it in your teeth, carrying news that should have been the most joyful thing in the world, what would you do? Would you knock on that door, or would you turn around and disappear into the dark? Amara knocked. Before we go any further, if stories like this one reach something real inside you, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel so you never miss what comes next. Drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The penthouse elevator opened directly into the foyer, which meant the moment Kang Tae-hyun's head of security, a thick-necked man named Do Sung-min, stepped aside and let her through. Amara was already inside the apartment before she'd fully made the decision to enter. She had rehearsed this. She had stood in front of her bathroom mirror in her small Itaewon apartment for 3 nights straight, saying the words aloud until they stopped making her cry. She had timed herself. She had planned for silence. She had planned for anger. She had not planned for the way Tae-hyun looked when he turned from the window, still in his suit jacket from whatever he had been doing that night, a glass of whiskey loose in his fingers. And his face did something she'd never seen it do before. It went soft. Just for a second, just long enough to mean something. Amara. He said her name the way people say the name of a thing they weren't sure was real. Then his eyes moved to her face, to her hands, to the way she was standing with her weight shifted slightly back, one arm crossed low across her stomach, a gesture she hadn't even realized she was making until she saw where he was looking. The softness left his face. What happened? She had told herself she would say it simply. No crying, no long preamble. She had told herself she would be calm and clear and leave him no room to misunderstand. Instead, what came out was, "I didn't know how to tell you." Tae-hyun set the glass down on the side table. It made a quiet sound against the marble. He took 3 steps toward her and stopped, leaving about 6 feet of expensive flooring between them. Close enough to hear her clearly, far enough that he wasn't crowding her. He had always known, almost instinctively, exactly how much space a person needed. It was one of the things that had made her fall for him in ways she still couldn't fully explain to herself. "Tell me what," he said. She pressed her lips together, looked at him. "This child is yours," she whispered. 3 seconds. She counted them. 1, 2, 3. The crystal tumbler came off the side table. She didn't even see him reach back for it, and hit the wall with a sound like a gunshot. It didn't shatter so much as explode. She flinched. Tiny pieces of glass hit the baseboard and skittered across the floor. Tae-hyun's voice, when it came, was very quiet. "That's impossible." Amara had prepared for anger. She had prepared for silence, for coldness, for the controlled, impenetrable face he wore when he was processing something dangerous. She had not prepared for the specific quality of his voice in that moment, low and scraped out, like something had reached inside his chest and pulled. "I know what you were told," she said carefully. "I know what you believe. But I'm telling you the truth." Amara. He said her name again, differently this time. The softness was completely gone. In its place was something she recognized from the first time she'd seen him handle a crisis. That absolute pressurized stillness that made everyone around him stop moving. "I need you to think very carefully before you say another word. I've been thinking about nothing else for 4 months. 4 months. He repeated it flatly. "I'm 16 weeks. He turned away from her, walked to the window, pressed one hand flat against the glass and stared out at the city below, the rain turning the Seoul skyline into smeared watercolors. His shoulders were rigid. She could see the tendons in his neck. "Who sent you here?" he said. The question hit her like cold water. "What?" I need to know who put you up to this. He still hadn't turned around. I need to know if this was Seijin or one of the Chiang family's people, or if someone inside my own organization decided they needed leverage over me. Because this, he paused, steadied himself, is the cruelest approach I've encountered in a long time, and I need to understand whose idea it was. Amara stood very still. She had been with this man for 11 months. She had eaten with him, slept beside him, sat in the quiet of early mornings when he didn't know she was watching him read. She had seen him negotiate, had seen him angry, had seen him careful. She had believed, in the way that turns out to be devastating when you're wrong, that she knew what he was capable of. Nobody sent me, she said. The medical reports are clear. He still wasn't looking at her. They have been clear for 15 years. You're telling me something that isn't possible, and I need to understand why. The medical reports could be wrong. They're not. Tai Hyun, Amara. He finally turned. His face was closed. Completely, absolutely closed. I'm asking you to leave. She didn't move. If you stay, he said, I'm going to say things I don't want to say. I don't want to do that to you. Something flickered behind his eyes, the only indication that there was anything happening inside him at all. I'm asking you, please, to leave. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her bag from where it had dropped to the floor when she flinched at the breaking glass, and she walked to the elevator, and she pressed the button, and she stood there with her back to him until the doors opened. She didn't cry until she was in the car. She cried until she couldn't anymore. Then she started thinking about what to do next. The first person Amara told was not a friend. It was her landlord, Mrs. O, who had knocked on her door the following Tuesday with a plate of sikya and stayed for 3 hours because she noticed that Amara had not taken her recycling down in 2 weeks, and that was the kind of detail Mrs. O did not let slide. By the end of the 3 hours, Amara had not told her everything, but she had told her enough, and Mrs. O had sat with her hands folded in her lap and said, in her careful, accented English, "Men who are afraid make bad decisions." Amara had thought about that sentence for a long time. She was not naive about who Tai Hyun was. She had figured out certain things gradually, the way you piece together a picture when someone only ever gives you the edge pieces. A comment here, a meeting that ended abruptly, the particular way that men who worked for him moved around him in rooms. She was an art conservator. She had spent her career learning to look at surfaces carefully, to understand that what a thing looked like on the outside was rarely the whole story about what it was made of underneath. She had not been looking for a man like him. She had been in Seoul for a restoration contract, a damaged series of late Joseon period silk panels that a private collector had purchased without fully understanding what years of humidity exposure had done to the pigment layers. She had been at a gallery opening, the collector's gallery, holding a glass of wine she wasn't drinking because she was thinking about gesso and whether the panels could survive a partial lining, and Tae Hyun had walked in, and someone behind her had exhaled sharply and taken a small step backward, and she had turned to see what caused it. She had looked at him directly. That was apparently unusual. He had noticed and crossed the room. The first thing he had said to her was not charming. It was direct and slightly blunt. "You're the conservator. I read the condition report. Walk me through what the previous owner did wrong." She had liked that, the sheer absence of pretense. 11 months later, she was sitting on the bathroom floor of her Itaewon apartment at 11 o'clock in the morning, staring at a test result, understanding with absolute clarity that her life had just changed in a direction she hadn't anticipated. She had not planned this. She needed him to understand that. She had not planned any of it. 3 days after she walked out of his penthouse, Tae Hyun's personal physician, not the family's longtime doctor, who had retired years ago, but the man who handled his routine care, received an unusual call. The caller did not identify himself by name. He asked, very precisely, for a recommendation for the most credible independent specialist in reproductive medicine in South Korea. He was not, the caller specified, interested in anyone with existing ties to the major hospital networks connected to old money Seoul families. The physician paused, then gave a name and a clinic address in Mapo. The following morning, Kang Tae-hyun sat in a consultation room that smelled of antiseptic and quiet anxiety and stared at a specialist he'd never met before while the man reviewed a summary of the 15-year-old medical file Tae-hyun had pulled from his family's private archive. The specialist read carefully. He looked up. Who performed the original analysis? He asked. A physician named Dr. Huang Jae-soon. He was the family's trusted doctor for many years. He's deceased now. And this result, the azoospermia finding, was it ever independently verified? A pause. No, Tae-hyun said. There was no reason to question it. The specialist looked at him over his glasses for a moment. Then he said quietly, I think you should come back in for a full workup. Amara had not told anyone at work. This was increasingly difficult to manage because she worked in close quarters with a woman named Ji-eun who noticed everything. And Ji-eun had already commented twice on the fact that Amara wasn't drinking coffee anymore, and once on the fact that Amara had turned slightly green during the unpacking of a Goryeo period Celadon shipment that had some kind of strongly mineral smell from the packing materials. You're off, Ji-eun told her, on a Wednesday, with the directness that Amara had come to understand was just how Ji-eun communicated. I'm fine, Amara said. You looked like you were going to be sick when we opened that crate. The packing material was aggressive. Ji-eun looked at her for a long moment. Then she went back to her work without pressing it, which was actually more unsettling than if she'd pushed, because it meant she had filed the observation away somewhere and would return to it later. Amara kept her hands steady and her face neutral and thought about the fact that in about 5 more weeks, she was not going to be able to keep this quiet, regardless of what happened with Tae-hyun. She had thought, after she left his apartment, that she felt something conclusive, an ending, a door shut. She had even spent 48 hours convincing herself that she was relieved, that now she knew, now she had certainty about what he was and what they weren't, and she could make decisions accordingly. That had lasted roughly 2 days. What replaced it was messier and harder to name. It wasn't hope, exactly. It was more like the feeling of a question that refuses to close. She did not call him. He did not call her. The results from the Mapo clinic came back 7 days later. Tae-hyun read the summary in his study, alone, at midnight, while the city outside made its usual sounds. He read it twice. Then he set it on the desk and sat for a while without moving. The specialist's language was careful and technical, but the meaning was not ambiguous. There was no medical basis for the original finding. The measurements were normal. The count was normal. The motility was normal. He was, in all clinically relevant respects, a healthy man with no documented fertility impairment. The original report had been wrong. He sat with that for a while. Wrong. He had carried that diagnosis since he was 19 years old. He had made decisions around it, not conscious life strategy decisions, but the quieter kind that accumulate over years. The way he had never let himself want something he was told he couldn't have. The way he had structured his interior life around a particular understanding of what his future would and would not contain. Wrong. And then, arriving alongside the quiet devastation of that word, the other question, the one that turned the floor cold under his feet. If the report was wrong, had it always been wrong? Had Dr. Huang Jae-soon simply made an error? 15 years ago, after the assassination attempt, when Tae-hyun was 19 and in a hospital bed and his father was trying to hold the syndicate together, and everyone around him was managing approximately 12 crises simultaneously, had the doctor simply been careless, rushed, working from contaminated samples or mislabeled results? He turned the question over. Then he picked up his phone and called a man named Park Yoon-seo. Park Yoon-seo did not work in medicine. He worked in information. Specifically, he worked in the kind of information that people tried very hard to make disappear. I need you to pull everything on Dr. Huang Jae-soon, Tae-hyun said. Financial records, communications, any professional connections he had outside of medical practice. Anything from 15 years ago that looks like it doesn't belong. How deep? Park Yoon-seo asked. Until you find what I think you're going to find, Tae-hyun said. Then keep going. He hung up, sat back in his chair, stared at the ceiling. He thought about Amara standing in his foyer with her arm crossed low across her stomach, and the fact that he had looked at that gesture and understood it, and then had done what he did anyway. That was the part that was hardest to sit with. He had known, somewhere below the level of conscious thought, what she was telling him, and he had reached for the glass. Park Yoon-seo called back in 4 days, which was fast. The fact that it was fast meant the trail hadn't been buried very well, or had been buried by someone who expected it to never be looked for. The doctor had a secondary account, Park Yun-seo said, opened in a subsidiary of a holding company connected to Kong Capital Enterprises. Not your father's direct company, a subsidiary, 2 levels removed. Tae-hyun was silent. There were 8 payments, Park said. The first one was transferred 3 days before your hospitalization. The last one was transferred 6 months after you were discharged, which I would guess is around when whatever was going to happen either happened or was confirmed to have been set in motion. Tae-hyun said, "Who controlled that subsidiary?" There was a brief pause on the line. Not hesitation. Park Yun-seo didn't hesitate. It was the pause of a man making sure he was going to say something correctly. "It traces back to Sejin," Park said. "Chairman Kong Sejin." The name landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. Tae-hyun closed his eyes. Sejin, his father's oldest and most trusted advisor, the man who had stood at the hospital bedside when the diagnosis was delivered. The man who had been, in the years that followed, consistently present at every major inflection point of Tae-hyun's life, recommending, advising, positioning himself as the steady hand that guided the young head of the Hwan Syndicate through the turbulence of succession. "Confirm it," Tae-hyun said. His voice was absolutely level. "I want the chain documented. I want every link established. Nothing circumstantial." "Already working on it," Park said. Tae-hyun ended the call. He sat in the dark for a long time. I was not a man who broke things casually. The glass, that night in his apartment, had not been casual. That had been something tearing loose that he hadn't been able to hold. He didn't like that about himself. The fact that it had come out sideways, aimed at a wall instead of at the thing he was actually feeling. He picked up his phone again. He put it down. He was not ready to call her yet, because he was not ready to say what he needed to say, and he refused to call her until he could say it correctly. He owed her that much. He owed her considerably more than that, actually. But that was where he was starting. It was Sejin who came to him first. He appeared at the penthouse on a Thursday evening, unannounced, which he had always done and which Tae-hyun had always permitted because he had, until very recently, trusted the man implicitly. He walked in with the ease of someone who considered himself at home, accepted a glass of water from Sung-min, and settled into the chair across from Tae-hyun's desk with the measured composure of a man who had been in difficult rooms before. "You've been asking questions," Sejin said. It wasn't an accusation. It was simply an observation, offered mildly, the way you might comment on the weather. Tae-hyun looked at him. He had known Sejin his entire adult life. He had admired him. He had taken his counsel on matters that shaped the organization, shaped his own decisions, shaped the direction of 15 years of his life. He had, in ways he was only now beginning to understand the full dimensions of, been managed by this man. Guided, redirected, kept at a particular distance from certain truths. "I'm always asking questions," Tae-hyun said. Sejin smiled slightly. "About Dr. Hwang." "Among other things." A brief pause. Sejin set his glass down carefully. "Some things are better left unexamined," he said. "There's no benefit to disturbing old records, old arrangements." Tae-hyun said nothing. "You've built something real here," Sejin continued. "The organization is stable. The succession is clean. Or it was, before this." He let that word sit there. This, as if Amara's pregnancy was a problem that had been introduced from the outside, something that had arrived to create disorder, rather than a truth that had always been there waiting to surface. "There's no reason to complicate things with..." "With what?" Tae-hyun asked. His voice was quiet. Sejin looked at him carefully. "With a woman who appeared at the wrong time, claiming, 'With my child,'" Tae-hyun said. The room went very still. Sejin's composure held, but something shifted behind his eyes. A recalculation. "Tae-hyun," he said. His voice had changed slightly. Quieter now, more careful. "You were told..." "I know what I was told." Tae-hyun stood. Not quickly, slowly, deliberately, the way you stand when you are making a decision about how you intend to occupy space for the rest of a conversation. "I also know what you arranged for me to be told, and why." The silence that followed was different from the silences that had preceded it. Sejin sat very still. The documentation is complete, Tae-hyun said. The payments, the account structure, the timeline relative to the diagnosis, all of it. He walked to the window, the same window he had stood at when Amara told him, the same glass with the same city below, and turned back. I want you to leave this building. I want you to go home. I want you to understand that the next conversation we have will not take place in private. Sejin stood. His face was composed. It was the composure of a man who had prepared for this possibility somewhere at the back of his mind for a long time. You're making a decision you haven't fully thought through, Sejin said. No, Tae-hyun said. I'm finishing thinking through a decision that you interrupted 15 years ago. Sejin left. Tae-hyun stood at the window for a long time after the elevator doors closed. Then he picked up his phone, and this time he did not put it down. He called Amara. She answered on the fourth ring, and her voice was careful and guarded, and he could hear, underneath that, the particular quality of someone who has been crying recently and is hoping it isn't obvious. I know this is late, he said. It's fine, she said. I need to tell you something. He stopped, reorganized. I need to ask you something first. I need to know if you're willing to let me... He stopped again. He was not good at this. He had never been good at this. If you would let me come over, I have information that I think changes what I said to you, what I assumed, and I need you to hear it from me directly. A long pause. Tae-hyun, she said, and her voice was tired in a way that landed somewhere specific in his chest. What kind of information? The kind, he said slowly, that means I was wrong, and that there are people responsible for why I was wrong, and that those people are not done with what they started. Another pause, longer this time. Okay, she said finally. Okay. Come over, she said. But I'm not making tea. You can sit there. It was such an Amara thing to say, practical and dry and slightly sharp, that something shifted in his chest. Not relief exactly, but the first thing that felt adjacent to it in weeks. I'll sit there, he said. He arrived at her apartment at 11:47 at night. She had left the downstairs door unlocked, which meant she had made a decision somewhere between the phone call and his arrival. Not a decision about forgiveness, not yet, but a decision about proximity. She was willing to be in the same room. That was what he had. He was not going to mistake it for more than it was. She was sitting on the couch when he came in, her feet tucked under her, both hands wrapped around a mug of something that wasn't tea. Hot water with lemon, he'd learn later, because the smell of tea had been making her sick for 6 weeks. She was wearing a gray sweatshirt that was slightly too big, and her hair was pulled back unevenly, like she'd done it in a hurry or redone it 3 times and given up. She looked exhausted. She looked like herself in a way she never quite did when she was around him in contexts where she'd had time to prepare, and he registered the specific weight of being allowed to see that. She didn't say anything when he came in, just watched him. He sat in the chair across from her, not the couch, the chair. He left the distance there deliberately. The medical report was fabricated, he said. She didn't react the way he expected. She didn't look relieved or vindicated or even particularly surprised. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has been sitting with a piece of information long enough that having it confirmed lands differently than they thought it would. How long have you known? She asked. The full picture, 4 days, enough to suspect 10 days. And you're telling me now? Yes. Why now and not 10 days ago? There was no heat in it. That was almost worse. It was a genuine question asked in the tone of someone trying to understand a pattern. He thought about the honest answer and gave it. Because 10 days ago I had suspicion. I wasn't willing to come to you again with anything less than certainty. I didn't want to show up here with a maybe. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, That's either very considerate or very controlling, and I haven't decided which. Probably both, he said. She looked down at her mug. A small exhale through her nose, not quite a laugh, but in the neighborhood of one. Then the almost laugh faded and she looked back up. Tell me what happened, she said. All of it. From the beginning. So he told her. He told her about the specialist in Mappo. He told her about the results. He told her about Park Yoon-seo and the secondary account, and the payments and the timing. 3 days before the hospitalization, 6 months after the discharge. He told her about Sejin. He told her about the conversation in the study. The way Seijin had sat there with his composed face and referred to her pregnancy as this, like it was a logistical complication rather than a human being currently making her nauseous in the mornings. He told her all of it in the same even, controlled voice he used for everything, and he watched her face as he did it. Watched the way her jaw tightened when he got to Seijin. Watched the way her eyes changed when he described the payment structure, the deliberateness of it. When he finished, the apartment was quiet. "He did this when you were 19, she said. "Yes." "After someone tried to kill you?" "Yes." "So you were in a hospital bed recovering from an assassination attempt, and the man your father trusted most paid your doctor to tell you that you'd never have children." She said it straight, without inflection, like she was confirming the terms of something. "That's what the evidence indicates." "Why?" Not a question exactly, more like she was thinking out loud. "Succession," he said. "If I believed I had no heir, the organization remained vulnerable. Vulnerable meant he stayed relevant, stayed necessary. It's a long game. 15 years is a very long game. Some people are patient." She set her mug down on the coffee table, looked at her hands for a moment. Then she looked up at him and said, "I need to know something, and I need you to answer me honestly, not the way you think I want to be answered." "Okay." "When I came to you, before any of this, before you knew any of this, was there a part of you that believed me? Even a small part?" He held that question. He could have answered quickly. He was good at quick answers, at responses that were technically true and strategically chosen. He didn't do that. He sat with it the way it deserved to be sat with. "Yes," he said. "There was a part. And you chose the diagnosis. I chose what I had 15 years of certainty about over what you were telling me in a single moment." He stopped. "That was wrong." She nodded slowly. Not absolution, just acknowledgement that he had said the accurate thing. "I don't know what I want from you right now," she said. "I need you to know that. I haven't made any decisions about what this is or what it becomes. I'm telling you that clearly. I understand. I'm 4 months pregnant. I'm tired all the time. I'm managing a significant restoration project at work with a team that doesn't know yet, and a colleague who already suspects. And now you're telling me that the man who runs whatever part of your organization handles," she gestured vaguely, "the structural side of power may have been working against you since before I was anywhere near the picture." "Yes." "So I'm in the middle of something that started 15 years before I knew you existed." "Yes." She picked her mug back up, looked at him over the rim of it. "You should go," she said. "Not because I'm done talking to you, because it's midnight and I need to sleep and I need to think. And you being here makes both of those things harder." He stood, buttoned his jacket, a habit, something his hands did automatically when he was preparing to move. "The man who arranged this," she said, just before he reached the door. "Seijin, what happens to him?" Taehyun turned. "That's being handled," he said. "That's not an answer." He looked at her. "He won't be a problem." "You keep saying things that sound like answers," she said quietly, and then not actually answering. He stood there with the door half open and the hallway light coming in behind him. He wanted to say something that would close the gap between them. Not completely, not right now, but enough. He couldn't find the words that would do it without being a lie. "I know," he said. He left. She sat for a long time in the quiet after he was gone. The next morning, Seijin called a meeting. Not with Tae-hyun. With 3 of the syndicate's senior regional directors, men who had been with the organization for decades, men who remembered Tae-hyun's father, men who had certain kinds of loyalties that ran along old channels and didn't automatically redirect themselves when leadership changed. He did it quietly. Breakfast at a private dining room in a hotel in Gangnam, the kind of room where the staff understood not to linger and not to remember. He arrived first, which was always his preference, and he sat at the head of the table, another preference. And when the 3 men came in and sat down and poured their coffee, he said, "There's a situation developing that some of you may have heard about. I want to make sure you're hearing the correct version." Director Lim, the oldest of the 3, set his cup down. "What situation?" "A woman has made a claim," Seijin said. "A paternity claim against Tae-hyun." The table was quiet for a moment. "We've all heard something," said Director Cheon. He was careful, Cheon, always careful. What's the concern? The concern, Sejin said, is stability. Taehyun has built what he's built on a particular foundation. He's been effective because he's been focused. Singular. No divided interests, no complications. If this claim is taken seriously, and I'm telling you now, it should not be, it cannot be verified, then we have a question of organizational direction that some of you should be thinking about. Lim was watching him, had been watching him throughout. Lim had been in this business long enough to understand the shape of a conversation before it finished taking shape. Is this about the woman? Lim said. Or is it about who comes after her? Sejin smiled slightly. It's about the organization's future. Those aren't the same thing, Lim said. They're related. Sejin. Lim leaned forward, put both forearms on the table. I've known you 31 years. I've watched you work. And I'm going to say something to you clearly because that's what 31 years earns. He paused. If you're suggesting what I think you're suggesting, if this breakfast is the beginning of a move against Taehyun's position, then I want no part of it, and neither will the other people you're thinking about calling. The table went quiet. Director Cheon looked at his coffee. Director Park, the youngest of the three, the one who had been most likely to be persuadable and who Sejin had most carefully cultivated, also looked at his coffee. Sejin sat with his composed face and said nothing. Tell me I'm reading this wrong, Lim said. Sejin said, You're always very direct. I'm reading it correctly, Lim said. He stood up. I'll be speaking with Taehyun today. He looked at Cheon and Park. I'd suggest you both consider carefully what you do next. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair and left without finishing his coffee. Sejin sat at the table for a long moment after the door closed. Then he took out his phone and made a different call, to a different kind of person. Taehyun found out about the breakfast from Lim himself, who called at 9:15 and delivered the information with the bluntness of a man who had decided what side of something he was on and wanted that clear. He's moving, Lim said. I don't know how far he's gotten or who else he's already talked to, but he's moving. Thank you, Taehyun said. I want nothing to do with whatever this becomes, Lim said, but I'm not going to pretend I don't know what I know. I understand. That's enough. He ended the call and sat with it for 30 seconds. Then he called Sung-min into the study and gave him a series of instructions, names, locations, specific movement protocols for the next 72 hours, and watched Sung-min write them down with the focused efficiency of a man who understood that the instructions were not theoretical. Then he called Park Yoon-seo. Sejin made contact with outside contractors this morning, Park told him before he could speak. I was about to call you. 2 names, both freelance, both with histories of what I'd describe as medical interference. Taehyun went still. Medical interference, he repeated. 2 of them have prior connections to cases involving induced miscarriage, Park said, and his voice was flat the way voices get when a person is being deliberately clinical because the alternative is too sharp to say in a professional context. It's not confirmed, but the contact happened, and the timing is, where is Amara right now? Taehyun said. I don't have eyes on her. He was already on his feet. Get eyes on her, he said. Right now. Don't call me back. Call Sung-min. I'm moving. He was out the door in 40 seconds. Amara was at the conservation lab. She didn't know he was coming. She didn't know about the breakfast or the contractors or the phone calls or any of the machinery that had begun moving in the hours since he'd left her apartment. She was standing at her work table with a magnifying headset pushed up on her forehead and a cotton swab in her hand, and she was trying to clean oxidized varnish from the lower left quadrant of a late Joseon silk panel, which required a level of concentration that didn't leave much room for anything else, which was honestly why she liked the work. Jian was at the adjacent table, cataloging a new acquisition. Neither of them had spoken in 40 minutes, which was a comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Then Taehyun walked in. Jian's hand stopped moving. Amara looked up from the panel and saw him standing in the doorway of the lab, not in his suit this time, in a dark jacket over a black shirt, and the energy he was carrying was different from anything she'd seen from him in the time she'd known him. Controlled, yes, always controlled. But underneath it, something running very fast. I need to talk to you, he said. Now. Ji-eun was very carefully not looking at either of them. I'm in the middle of, Amara started. Amara. His voice dropped half a register, not louder, the opposite of louder, which was somehow more insistent. Please. She set the swab down, pulled the headset off, said to Jian without looking at her, I'll be back in 10 minutes. Jian said equally carefully, take whatever you need. They went into the small office at the back of the lab, barely large enough for a desk and 2 chairs, with one high window that looked out at the concrete wall of the adjacent building. He closed the door. She crossed her arms and looked at him. What happened? She said. He told her. Fast and clear, none of the careful framing he'd used the night before, just the facts in order. The breakfast, Lim's call, Park's information, the 2 names, what those names likely meant. She stood very still through all of it. When he finished, she said, You think he's going to try to hurt the baby? I think he's preparing options, Taehyun said. I don't know yet if he's moved past preparation. I'm not willing to wait until I do know. She looked at him for a long moment. Her arms were still crossed, but her hands had tightened on her own elbows. A small thing, the kind of thing you noticed if you were paying the kind of attention he was paying. What does that mean? She said. What do you actually want me to do? I want you to let me put someone with you, not visible. You won't have to change anything you're doing. You won't have to explain anything to anyone at work. But someone present. A bodyguard. Yes. Taehyun. She exhaled. If I have a bodyguard, then my life has changed in a way that doesn't change back. You understand that? Yes. And you're asking me to make that decision today. I'm asking you to make it in the next 20 minutes. She looked at the window, at the concrete wall outside, then back at him. And if I say no? He held that. He had an answer, the honest answer. And the honest answer was that he was not going to leave her unprotected regardless of what she said, because the alternative was not something he was capable of choosing. He was also aware that saying that was a different kind of decision, one that said something specific about where the line was between protecting someone and overriding them. If you say no, he said, I'm going to stay anyway, personally, until I have a better read on where Sejin is in his planning. She stared at him. You're going to stay, she repeated. Yes. In my apartment. If that's what it takes. Taehyun, I live in 400 square feet. I know. You have a penthouse. I'm aware. Something crossed her face, complicated, layered, and then she pressed her mouth together and looked away. This is, she started. I know, he said. You can't just, I know. He took a breath. Amara, I know that I have spent the last several weeks demonstrating convincingly that I make bad decisions under pressure. I'm not asking you to trust that I'm handling this correctly. I'm asking you to consider that the alternative right now, today, is genuinely dangerous, and that I am the person best positioned to address that, and that I would like to do that with your cooperation rather than without it. A pause. Please. The please landed differently than the rest of it. She looked at him. He looked back. There was a long, quiet, very loaded moment during which the whole weight of the last several weeks lived between them. The glass against the wall, the elevator doors, the midnight conversation, all of it, and neither of them looked away. Fine, she said finally, but if you're staying in my apartment, you're sleeping on the couch, and you're not touching anything in my kitchen without asking. Understood. And you're explaining this to Jian, not me. I'll explain it. She's going to have questions. I'll answer them. She moved toward the door, then stopped with her hand on the frame. For the record, she said, without turning around, I knew you weren't going to leave, even if I said no. He didn't answer. I just wanted to see if you'd be honest about it, she said. She walked back into the lab. Ji-in's questions were few and precise, and she listened to Taehyun's careful, partially true answers with the expression of someone filing information in a very specific mental drawer and locking it. When he finished, she said, Is Amara safe here today? For today, yes, he said. I'm working on the larger situation. Ji-in looked at him the way very sharp people look at you when they've already decided what they think and are simply confirming it. Then she nodded and went back to her cataloging. Taehyun stepped to the corner of the lab and called Sung-min. Sejin, he said quietly. I want round-the-clock documentation of his location, every contact he makes. I want to know the moment he moves toward any of the names Park flagged. Understood, Sungmin said. Then, there's something else. Taehyun waited. The facility in Dobong-gu, Sungmin said. The old medical research building, the one your father used before the transfer of records in 2014. Park thinks some of the original files may still be there. Physical copies, including the original laboratory reports from Dr. Huang's work. Taehyun said nothing for a moment. If Sejin knows those files exist, Sungmin continued, and if they contain anything that directly contradicts what he arranged to have on record, he'll move to destroy them, Taehyun said. Yes. Taehyun looked across the lab at Amara, who was back at her work table with the headset on, carefully working the same small quadrant of silk panel she'd been working when he arrived, her hands steady and precise. Doing the thing she knew how to do, being exactly who she was. Secure the facility, he said quietly. Nobody goes in or out without my authorization. If those files are there, I want them protected. He paused. And I want to know if anyone else tries to access that building in the next 24 hours. Already on it, Sungmin said. He ended the call. Stood in the corner of the lab for a moment. The files in that building, if they existed, if they contained what he thought they contained, were the difference between suspicion and proof, between a story that could be denied and one that couldn't. Sejin had spent 15 years building a particular version of events. Taehyun had spent 15 years living inside it without knowing it was a construction. What lived in that building, if Park was right, was the original record. The thing Sejin had built everything else on top of. And somewhere in the city, Sejin was making his own calculations about what needed to disappear before those records could be found. The window was closing. Taehyun looked at his phone. Then he looked at Amara again. The precise, careful movements of her hands, the slight tilt of her head as she examined the panel surface. He had one night, maybe less. After that, whatever Sejin was planning stopped being preparation and became action. And the difference between those two things was the difference between being ahead of something and being behind it, and Taehyun had not survived this long by being behind things. He walked back across the lab and sat down in the chair next to the door and waited. And the weight of what was coming settled into the room around him like weather moving in off the water. He got the call at 2:17 in the morning. Not from Sungmin. From Park Yoon-seo, which meant it was the kind of information that moved faster than protocol. Taehyun was awake. He had been awake since midnight, sitting on Amara's couch with his jacket folded over the armrest and his phone in his hand, running through contingencies in the way his mind worked when it was under pressure. Not frantically, but methodically, the way you work through a locked mechanism, testing each point of resistance in sequence. Amara had gone to bed at 11. He had listened to the sounds of her apartment settling into nighttime quiet and thought about the fact that he had never been in this space before, that he had always met her at his penthouse or at restaurants or at the gallery, and that her apartment was full of small specific things that were entirely her, a shelf of conservation reference books with broken spines, a line of small river stones along the windowsill, a thin wool blanket folded over the back of the couch that smelled faintly of cedar. He answered on the first ring. The facility, Park said. Someone went in 3 hours ago. Taehyun was on his feet before Park finished the sentence. Sungmin's team. They got there 12 minutes after the breach. Whoever went in knew the layout, knew exactly which floor, which storage room. A pause. Taehyun. The original files, the physical copies of Huang's laboratory reports, they're gone. The apartment was very quiet. How many files, he said, based on what Sungmin's team found. Everything from the relevant period. The originals, the chain of custody records, the intake documentation. If there were physical copies that directly contradicted what was submitted to your family's records, they are no longer in that building. Taehyun stood in the dark of Amara's living room and felt the shape of what had just happened settle into place. Sejin had moved first. He had spent the day, the whole day, while Taehyun was positioning protection around Amara, while he was managing Lim and running through scenarios. Sejin had spent it doing something much more specific. He had not made a visible, aggressive move. He had made a surgical one. He had gone to the source and removed it. The financial records still existed. Park's documentation of the payment chain still existed. But the original laboratory reports, the ones that would have shown in Dr. Huang's own hand, what the actual findings were before they were altered, those were gone. Without them, what Tae-hyun had was a money trail that suggested corruption but could be explained around. With them, what he'd had was proof that couldn't be reframed. Sejin knew exactly what he was doing. "Do we have any record of what was in those files?" Tae-hyun asked. "Any copies, any photographs, any reference documentation from the original intake?" "I'm looking," Park said. But if Sejin had someone remove them, he had someone who knew what to take and what to leave. This wasn't a sweep. This was precise. How precise? They left everything else in that storage room untouched. Tax records, property documentation, acquisition files. Only the medical files from that specific 18-month period are missing. Tae-hyun pressed the heel of his hand against the window frame and stared out at the street below. Empty at this hour, wet from earlier rain, a single taxi moving slowly through the intersection at the corner. "Find me anything," he said. "Copies, references, correspondence that mentions the files, anything Hwang may have sent to a third party. Go back through everything." "I'm already there," Park said. "I'll call you when I have something." A brief pause. "Tae-hyun, he's ahead of you right now." "I know." He ended the call. He stood at the window for a while, not because standing there was useful, but because the alternative was movement, and movement right now would wake Amara, and he needed 60 seconds to think before he did anything else. Sejin had spent 15 years being patient. He had waited through Tae-hyun's ascension, through the consolidation of power, through every organizational development of the last decade, biding his time, keeping his arrangement buried, staying relevant and trusted and present. He had not panicked when Tae-hyun had confronted him in the study. He had left calmly. He had immediately gone to work. That was the thing about patient men. When they finally moved, they moved with 15 years of accumulated clarity about exactly what needed to happen. Tae-hyun's move now, his obvious move, was to go after Sejin directly. Take him into custody, extract what he knew, use the financial records and whatever else Park could find to build a case in front of the syndicate's remaining leadership. Lim was already on his side. Cheon and Park, the two directors who had been at the breakfast, were at minimum uncertain, which was salvageable. It was the right move. It was also exactly what Sejin expected. He turned away from the window. A sound from the hallway, the soft, specific sound of a door opening, and then Amara appeared in the entrance to the living room in a dark sweatshirt and socks, her hair down around her shoulders, her face carrying the slightly blurred look of someone who had been asleep but not deeply. She looked at him, at his face, at the phone in his hand and the jacket still folded over the couch. "What happened?" she said. Not a question. The exact same tone she'd used in the lab. He told her. She listened without interrupting, leaning against the door frame with her arms crossed, and when he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "So the best evidence you had is gone," she said. "The most direct evidence. The financial records still can be explained around. You said that." She looked at the floor. "So what does that mean for what he can do now?" "It means his position is stronger than it was yesterday." "And what does that mean for us?" He held that word, us, because she had said it, and that was its own specific thing in the middle of everything else. "It means we move faster than I planned," he said, "and it means the approach changes." "How?" "Instead of building a case to present," he said, "we need to force a confrontation on ground eye control before he can consolidate what he gained tonight." She looked up. "You're going to go at him directly?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Is that dangerous?" He looked at her. The honest answer was yes. The truthful elaboration of that answer was that it was significantly more dangerous than what he'd been planning 12 hours ago, because Sejin had just demonstrated that he was willing to move without warning and with precision, which meant the comfortable assumption that they had time to plan carefully was no longer an assumption he could make. "Yes," he said. She nodded. Slow, once. "Okay," she said. "Then I want to know what I'm supposed to do while that's happening. Not what you want me to do, what I'm actually supposed to do if something goes wrong." He pulled out his phone and sent Sungmin a specific instruction. Then he looked at her. "Pack a bag," he said. "Enough for 3 days. I'm moving you somewhere more secure in the morning." She held his gaze for a moment, then she went back to the bedroom. He listened to the quiet sounds of her moving around in there, the closet opening, a zipper, drawers. and understood in a way he hadn't fully understood before that night that everything he had built and every choice he had made in the last 15 years had been shaped by a lie someone else constructed, and that the cost of that lie was only now becoming fully visible, not in organizational terms, not in terms of power or succession or any of the things Seijin had calculated, but in the specific, irreducible fact of a woman in the next room packing a bag at 2:30 in the morning because someone had decided 15 years ago that Taehyun's future was a thing they were entitled to arrange. He sat back down on the couch, picked up his phone again, made the calls that needed to be made. By 6 in the morning, Amara was in a safe house in Seongbuk-dong, a clean, quiet apartment on the 3rd floor of a building Taehyun's organization owned through a holding company that had no obvious connection to the Hwan Syndicate. 2 of Sungmin's best people were in the building, 1 outside. Amara had looked at the apartment and said, "This has better natural light than my place." And he'd had no idea if she was being sardonic or genuine, and then she'd put her bag down and said, "Go do what you have to do." And he had. He met with Sungmin and 3 senior loyalists at a private location in Mapo at 7. He laid out the revised approach and watched them absorb it. Sungmin asked 2 specific questions about timing and 1 about contingency. The other 3 listened and confirmed readiness. At 9, he called Director Lim. "I need a meeting of the senior leadership," Taehyun said. "Today. Within the organization's existing structure. I want this legitimate, on record, witnessed by everyone who has standing to be in the room." Lim was quiet for a moment. "That includes Seijin," Lim said. "Yes. He'll know what you're doing." "Good. I want him in a room with the full leadership present. That limits what he can do." Another pause. "Or it gives him an audience for whatever he's prepared." "Then let's see what he's prepared," Taehyun said. "Can you organize it?" "I can have everyone in a room by 2, Lim said. "You're sure about this?" "Call me when the room is confirmed." He ended the call. Then he went to find Park Yoon-seo in person. Park worked out of a nondescript office in a building in Yongsan that appeared, from the outside and from most of the inside, to belong to a mid-level data management company. It genuinely did belong to a mid-level data management company. Park's actual work happened in a back room accessible through a door that was convincingly labeled as a server maintenance closet. Park was already there when Taehyun arrived. He hadn't slept. That was clear from the particular flatness around his eyes, and the 3 empty coffee cups lined up along the edge of his primary monitor. "Tell me you found something," Taehyun said. "Sit down," Park said. That was not Park's usual register. Taehyun sat. Park turned one of his monitors toward him. "I went back through Hwang's professional correspondence from the relevant period. Most of it was destroyed, either by Hwang before he died or by someone who went through his records afterward. But there was a malpractice inquiry in 2011. Minor, unrelated, ultimately dismissed. It generated a record subpoena from a civil court, and as part of that subpoena, Hwang's office submitted a document index. Not the documents themselves, just the index. And," Park pointed at the screen, "line 47, document reference HJ091144. Description: Hwan family patient, reproductive analysis, original findings, preliminary draft. Date of creation, 3 days before the falsified report was filed with your family's records." Taehyun looked at the screen. "A preliminary draft," he said. "Hwang drafted the real findings first. Standard practice. You write up what you found, then you write the submission document. Most of the time, those are identical. In this case, they weren't." Park leaned back. "The document index references it, which means it existed, which means it was in Hwang's files at some point. You said the malpractice inquiry was dismissed." "Yes, but the subpoena records are archived with the civil court, including the document index." Park paused. "I cannot get into the court archive remotely, but the index establishes the document existed. If that preliminary draft still exists somewhere, in Hwang's personal records, in the possession of whoever handled his estate, it would be direct evidence, in Hwang's own handwriting." Taehyun looked at him. "Hwang died in 2019, Park said. His estate was handled by his younger brother, a man named Hwang Jae-kyu, who lives in Daejeon. I have his address." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. "I can't tell you if he has the document, I can't tell you if he even knows what's in his brother's personal files. But if Huang kept any professional records at home, which a man that careful probably did, they would have passed to the brother. Tae-hyun picked up the piece of paper. This is what we have, Park said. The financial records, the court archive reference, and a dead man's brother in Daejeon, who may or may not have a preliminary draft that proves what your original diagnosis should have said. And the meeting is at 2, Tae-hyun said, which gives you approximately 5 hours. He stood, folded the paper. The brother doesn't know I'm coming, he said. No. And if he doesn't have the draft, Park held his gaze, then you walk into that meeting with the financial records and a document index and no physical evidence of what the actual findings were, which is strong enough to raise serious doubt, not strong enough to be definitive. Tae-hyun pocketed the paper. Then I need to get to Daejeon, he said. He drove himself, which was unusual. He normally let Sung-min drive because it freed his hands and his attention. But Sung-min needed to be managing the preparations for the 2 o'clock meeting, and there was something about this particular errand that felt like it required solitude, like it was too specifically personal to have a witness. The drive to Daejeon was just under 2 hours. He made it in an hour 40. Hwang Jae-kyu lived in a quiet neighborhood of modest houses, the kind of area that had existed in the same slightly frayed, slightly comfortable configuration for 30 years. He was 71 years old, and he opened the door in a cardigan and looked at Tae-hyun with the specific expression of a person who had not been expecting anyone and was processing several things simultaneously. The face, the build, the quality of the clothing, the car visible at the curb. Mr. Hwang, Tae-hyun said. I apologize for the intrusion. My name is Kang Tae-hyun. I need to speak with you about your brother. The old man was quiet for a long moment. I know who you are, he said. Something shifted in the air. Then you know why I might be here, Tae-hyun said. Another pause. Hwang Jae-kyu looked at him, a long reading look, the kind that takes inventory, and then stepped back from the door. Come inside, he said. What? The house was small and very clean. Family photographs on the walls. A shelf of medical reference books. Hwang Jae-kyu had been a pharmacist, Park had told him, now retired, and a small desk in the corner of the living room with a laptop that was years out of date. They sat at the kitchen table. Hwang Jae-kyu made tea without asking, which Tae-hyun recognized as something people did when they needed a task to occupy their hands while they decided how much to say. My brother was not a bad man, Hwang Jae-kyu said. He had his hands around his cup. He was looking at the table. I want you to understand that before anything else. I'm not here to judge your brother, Tae-hyun said. He made a serious mistake. The old man looked up. His eyes were clear and tired. He told me. Not right away. Not for years. He told me in 2017, 2 years before he died. He was not well, and I think he needed someone to know. A pause. I was given money, a significant amount of money, for a physician of his position. He was told it was a simple thing, a misdirection in the filing, a clerical adjustment, something that would be corrected later when certain circumstances changed. He exhaled slowly. He told himself that story for a long time. Did he keep records? Tae-hyun asked. His voice was careful and even. His own records, separate from what was submitted. Hwang Jae-kyu looked at him. He gave me something before he died, the old man said. He told me to keep it. He told me that if anyone ever came asking, specifically you, he said your name, I should give it to them. He paused. I thought it was the illness talking. I thought no one would ever come. But you kept it, Tae-hyun said. I kept it. The old man stood and went to the back of the house. Tae-hyun sat at the kitchen table and looked at the family photographs on the wall and the steam rising from his untouched tea, and thought about a physician who had carried this for 8 years before telling his brother, and another 2 years after that, and had still somehow arranged for it to be handed over if the right person came. That was a man who had not entirely made his peace with what he'd done. Hwang Jae-kyu returned with a manila envelope, aged, slightly soft at the corners. He set it on the table and sat back down and pushed it toward Tae-hyun. Inside was a single document, handwritten, Hwang Jae-soon's clinical notation, dated 3 days before the falsified report, laying out in precise medical handwriting the actual findings of the analysis. Normal parameters, normal results, no clinical basis for an infertility diagnosis. In the margin, in a different pen, added later, from the quality of the ink, a single line in smaller writing. This was altered at the instruction of KSJ. I am sorry. I was not strong enough. KSJ, Kong Se-jin. Tae-hyun sat very still. He had known. Intellectually, evidentiary, he had known. The financial record said it clearly. But there was something about seeing it in the dead man's handwriting, the apology, the specific cowardice of, I was not strong enough. The fact that Huang had known exactly what he'd done and had lived inside that knowledge for the better part of 2 decades, that landed differently than evidence had any right to land. He put the document back in the envelope. Thank you, he said. Huang JQ nodded. He looked old in that moment, and tired, and like a man who had been waiting to put something down for a long time. Tae-hyun drove back towards Seoul. He had the document. He had the meeting at 2. He had, for the first time since Amara had appeared at his door, something that felt like solid ground under his feet. He was 40 minutes outside of Daejeon when Seungmin called. There's a problem, Seungmin said. The particular quality of those 3 words, the specific, compressed weight of them, told Tae-hyun immediately that this was not a logistical problem. This was the other kind. Tell me, he said. Se-jin made a move this morning before the meeting was confirmed, before we had the room organized. A pause. He contacted Amara directly. I don't know how he got the address for the safe house. We're looking at that now. But one of his people approached her when she went out for air, on the building's exterior walkway. Tae-hyun's grip on the wheel tightened. She's unharmed, Seungmin said quickly. My people responded immediately, but Se-jin's man gave her something, an envelope. Another pause. Tae-hyun, she opened it. She told my people she wanted them to hear what was in it. What was in it? Photographs, Seungmin said, of you. From the period before Amara, so there were women, you remember. There were several situations. He stopped. Started differently. There's documentation in the envelope. Signed documents from 2 women claiming that you pressured them. Coercion. The language is specific and the documents look official. The highway stretched ahead of him, gray and long. They're fabricated, Tae-hyun said. Yes, but they look real, Tae-hyun. Someone put serious work into making them look real. And Se-jin's man told her directly, that these would be sent to every media contact in Seoul tonight unless she agreed to certain terms. What terms? The pause was a half-second too long. She leaves the country, Seungmin said, before the child is born, and she signs a statement confirming that the pregnancy resulted from a casual relationship and that she makes no claims of any kind on the Kong family. Tae-hyun said nothing. The road moved under him. She hasn't agreed to anything, Seungmin said. She told my people, said, another pause. She said, tell him Se-jin doesn't know who he picked the wrong fight with. Despite everything, despite the document on the seat beside him and the meeting in 2 hours and the 40 minutes of road still between him and Seoul, something happened in Tae-hyun's chest at that, something that was not tactical or strategic or calculated. Tell her I'm coming, he said. Tell her I'll be there in 40 minutes. He pushed the car faster. He had the document. He had the meeting. He had Amara, who had apparently looked at a fabricated blackmail package and decided her first move was to make sure he knew about it rather than to panic, which was, he didn't have the right word for what that was, only that it hit somewhere specific and stayed there. And Se-jin had just made his most desperate move yet, which meant Se-jin was afraid. Afraid men made mistakes. Tae-hyun drove and thought about mistakes, and understood with a clarity he hadn't had before that morning that the meeting at 2 was no longer about building a case. It was about a confrontation that only one of them was going to walk out of with anything intact. And for the first time since this began, Tae-hyun understood that he was ready for that, fully and without reservation, not because he was certain of winning, but because he was certain, finally, of what he was fighting for. He made it back to Seoul in 38 minutes. Amara was sitting at the kitchen table of the safe house when he came in, both hands flat on the surface, the envelope open in front of her. She had looked at everything in it. That was clear from the particular kind of steadiness on her face. The steadiness of someone who has already processed the worst of something and come out the other side into a colder, clearer place. Sungmin's man was standing near the window. He gave Taehyun a small nod when he entered. Taehyun sat down across from Amara. He didn't look at the envelope. He looked at her. "Are you all right?" he said. "I'm fine," she said. "I need you to know I didn't hesitate. The man handed it to me and I walked straight back inside and told your people to call you." "I know. I want to be clear about that because I don't want you spending energy worrying about whether I panicked." "I know you didn't panic." She exhaled through her nose, looked at the envelope. "These are fake." "Yes." "The women, the documents." "Yes." "You're certain?" "Yes." She pushed the envelope to the side, looked at him directly. "What are you going to do?" He put the manila envelope from Daejeon on the table between them, watched her look at it. "That's what Huang's brother had," he said. "The original findings, in Huang's handwriting, with a notation identifying Sejin by his initials as the person who ordered the falsification." She looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then she looked up. "Is that enough?" she said. "Yes," he said. "With the financial records and the court archive reference in this, yes, it's enough." "Then you have what you need for the meeting." "The meeting is at 2, he said. "That's 70 minutes. She nodded, said nothing for a moment. Then, "He sent someone to where I'm sleeping, Taehyun. He found this address." "I know. We're looking at how." "Which means he has someone inside your organization." He had been thinking about that for the entire drive back. It was the most unsettling piece of the morning, more unsettling in some ways than the fabricated documents, because the documents were a move born of desperation. Someone on the inside who had given Sejin the safe house address. That was something that had been in place for a while. Something patient. "Yes," he said. "That's what it means." "Which means the people going into that meeting with you." "I know who I trust," he said. "Lim, Sungmin, 3 others. That's the circle." He looked at her. "I need you to stay here. Don't go out. Don't open the door for anyone that Sungmin hasn't cleared personally. When this meeting is done, I'll come back here directly." She looked at him. "And if the meeting goes wrong?" "It won't." "That's not an answer." He looked at her across the table, at the documents between them, at her hands still flat on the surface, still steady. "If the meeting goes wrong," he said, "Sungmin has instructions to move you to a secondary location and get you out of the country. There's an account in your name at a bank in Singapore. It has enough to take care of you and the child for several years." He paused. "I set that up 3 days ago." She stared at him. "You set up an account," she said slowly. "Yes." "3 days ago." "Yes." The stillness on her face shifted into something harder to read. Not anger, something more complicated than anger. The particular expression of a person who is absorbing the fact that someone has been thinking about their future carefully and in secret and without being asked to. "Tae-hyun," she said. "I know," he said. I know what that looks like. But I needed you to have options that didn't depend on how today goes." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Come back from this meeting." "Yes." "That's what I need from you, not accounts in Singapore. Come back from it." He stood, picked up the Daejeon envelope, looked at her once more. "Stay inside," he said. He left. The meeting was held in a private conference room on the 14th floor of a building in Jung-gu that the syndicate maintained under a legitimate consulting firm's name. It was a neutral location by design, not Taehyun's territory, not Sejin's, one of the few spaces the organization's senior leadership had agreed, years ago, constituted common ground. 8 people in the room when Taehyun arrived. Lim was already there, standing near the window, and he gave Taehyun a look that communicated several things efficiently. "Sejin is here, the room is uncertain, watch Cheon." Sejin was at the far end of the table. He had arrived early, which was his consistent preference, and which Taehyun now understood as part of a deliberate performance of control. He was impeccably dressed, which was also consistent. He looked, at a glance, like a man who had slept well and was prepared to conduct routine business. But his eyes, when they found Taehyun, moved a fraction too fast, adjusted a fraction too quickly into their composed expression. He had not expected the Daejeon envelope. He didn't know about it yet. Couldn't know. But something in Tae-hyun's posture or his pace or the particular quality of his arrival had registered. And Sejin was a man who read rooms the way Amara read paintings, looking beneath the surface for what the visible layer was covering. Director Cheon was seated mid-table. He looked at Tae-hyun when he came in and looked away again too quickly. Cheon was frightened. That was interesting. Frightened of what, exactly? Of Sejin, of Tae-hyun, of what the room was about to become. That was the question. Director Park, the youngest, the one Sejin had been cultivating longest, was at the end of the table nearest the door, angled slightly in his chair in a way that was not quite relaxed and not quite ready to stand. He had the expression of a man who had made a decision and was waiting to see if it was the right one. Tae-hyun sat at the head of the table opposite Sejin. He set the envelope in front of him, did not open it. "I asked for this meeting," he said, "because there is a matter that concerns everyone in this room, and I believe everyone in this room deserves to hear the same information at the same time." He watched Sejin. Sejin was looking at the envelope. 15 years ago, Tae-hyun said, I received a medical diagnosis that affected the course of my personal life and the perceived structure of this organization's succession. I was told I would never have an heir. Many of you were aware of this, or became aware of it over the years, and it shaped certain understandings about how leadership would continue in the future. The room was completely quiet. That diagnosis was false, he said. It was fabricated by a physician who was paid to falsify it. The payment came from a financial structure controlled by Chairman Kang Se-jin. He watched the room absorb this. Lim's face didn't change. He already knew. Cheon looked at the table. The others, 4 directors and 2 senior operational figures, shifted in their chairs with the particular contained movement of people receiving information that is reorganizing everything they thought they understood. Sejin said nothing. He was looking at the envelope. I have documentation, Tae-hyun said. The financial records establishing the payment chain. A civil court archive reference confirming the existence of an original findings document. And the original findings document itself, in the physician's handwriting, with a notation identifying the person who ordered the falsification by his initials. He opened the envelope, slid the document down the table toward the center, where it could be reached by anyone who wanted to examine it. KSJ, he said, Kang Se-jin. The silence stretched. Then Sejin spoke. This is a fabrication, he said. His voice was perfectly level. This document was produced by the physician's brother, Tae-hyun said, who has been in possession of it since his brother's death in 2019. I spoke with him this morning. He looked at Sejin. His brother dictated a statement before he died. That statement is also in my possession. Hwang Jae-soon identified you by name. Something moved behind Sejin's eyes. Fast, controlled. The adjustment of a man who has hit an unexpected wall and is already rerouting. Even if these records are accurate, Sejin said, the question before this room is not one of historical records. The question is organizational stability. There is currently a paternity claim against Tae-hyun that is accurate, Tae-hyun said. My child exists. The woman carrying my child is under protection right now because 3 days ago you sent 2 contractors to Seoul who have histories involving medical interference. He let that land. This room should understand clearly what that means. It means you attempted to arrange the death of my unborn child. The room broke. Not loudly. These were not people who shouted in professional contexts. But Director Lim put his hands on the table and stood. One of the operational directors pushed his chair back. Cheon looked up from the table for the first time since the meeting started, and the expression on his face was not the fear Tae-hyun had noted earlier, but something that had curdled past fear into something like shame. Sejin, Lim said. His voice was low and absolutely flat. Tell me that's not accurate. Sejin looked at him. You are hearing a version of events constructed to... Tell me that is not accurate, Lim said again. A pause. That pause was the end of something. Sejin looked around the room. And for the first time in the 31 years Lim had known him, and the 20 years most of the others had known him, in all that accumulated time, his composure showed a crack. Not a collapse. A crack. A single visible line of fracture in the surface of the face he had been maintaining for decades. The organization's future, he said, Required. Stop, Taehyun said. Sejin stopped. The room was very still, the kind of still that comes after something breaks. Taehyun stood. You arranged the falsification of a medical report when I was 19 years old and in a hospital bed, he said. You stole 15 years of my life. You arranged for a woman carrying my child to be coerced into leaving the country. And when that didn't work, when the documentation started to surface, you sent someone to a facility in Dobong-gu in the middle of the night to remove the physical evidence. He looked at the room. I want everyone in this room to understand what has been done, who did it, and why. I want there to be no ambiguity when decisions are made about what happens next. Director Park stood. Taehyun looked at him, expecting the calculation. Park had been Sejin's most careful cultivation, the youngest director, the one who had been groomed for a specific alignment. Park said, "What do you need from us?" "Not from Sejin. From Tae-hyun." Sejin looked at Park with the expression of a man watching a wall he built for 15 years come down brick by brick. I need everyone in this room to formally confirm on record that they've seen this documentation and that they accept its authenticity, Taehyun said. I need that confirmation witnessed and documented in the organization's standing record. He looked at Sejin. And I need Chairman Kang Sejin removed from his position and held within the organization's custody, pending a full accounting of every decision he has influenced over the past 15 years. Sejin said, You cannot. Lim, Taehyun said. Lim nodded to the two men standing near the door, Sungmin's people, positioned there at the start of the meeting for precisely this purpose. Sejin looked at them, looked at Taehyun, looked at the room. He did something then that Taehyun had not expected. He laughed, short, quiet, without pleasure. You think this ends here, Sejin said, in this room, with those two men at the door. He adjusted his jacket with the automatic precision of a man who cannot stop performing composure even when everything is already done. There are people outside this organization who have been informed about certain situations, certain documents. If I am taken into custody, those people have instructions. The fabricated documents you sent to Amara, Taehyun said. Sejin looked at him. Those aren't the only copies, Sejin said. Taehyun looked at him for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and placed it on the table and pressed play on an audio recording. The voice in the recording was Sejin's. The conversation was from the previous evening, a phone call in which Sejin had spoken to a man named Hong, one of the freelance contractors Park had flagged, and in which Sejin had referenced the fabricated documents explicitly, had confirmed their fabricated nature, and had given specific instructions about their distribution timeline. Park had pulled the recording that morning. It had taken him 4 hours. The room listened to Sejin's voice on the recording describe, in his own measured cadences, the construction of a blackmail package built on invented documents, the targeting of a pregnant woman, and the timeline for pressure. When the recording ended, the room was the quietest it had been. Sejin sat down. Not a decision. His legs simply settled him into the chair, the way a body does when it has run out of instructions to process. Take him, Taehyun said. Sungmin's people moved. Sejin didn't resist. He sat with his hands flat on the table. The echo of Amara's posture that morning so specific that it registered absurdly in the middle of everything else, and he let them take his arms and guide him up and toward the door. At the threshold he stopped, looked back at Taehyun. The facility, Sejin said. His voice had changed, still controlled, but something underneath it had shifted. Something that was less composure and more the specific flatness of a man who has decided, in his last available moment, to do one more thing. The Dobong-gu facility. I didn't only send someone for the files. The room went cold. What? Taehyun said. There are materials in that building, Sejin said. Medical materials. Things Dr. Huang stored there when the facility was still active. Things that were never removed because no one knew they were relevant. A pause. Hong has been in that building since this morning. He's not there for records. Taehyun was already moving. He was out the door before Sejin finished speaking, his phone in his hand, calling Sungmin with a single instruction before the elevator reached the ground floor. Sungmin picked up on the first ring. The Dobong-gu facility, Taehyun said. There's someone inside. And I need you to tell me where Amara is right now. A 2-second pause that lasted longer than 2 seconds. Sung-min, Tae-hyun said. The safe house is clear, Sung-min said. She's there. My people are with her. Another pause. But Tae-hyun, one of my people at the facility just went dark. His check-in was 10 minutes ago, and he's not responding. Tae-hyun hit the street. His car was 30 meters away. He covered it in seconds. Get every available person to Dobong-gu, he said. Right now. And pull your people at the safe house back to 1. Keep 1 with her, pull the rest. He was in the car, the engine turning over. I need bodies at that facility. You're going there, Sung-min said. Not a question. Yes. Tae-hyun, we don't know how many. I'm going, he said. He pulled into traffic. The facility was 40 minutes away in normal conditions. He had the Daejin envelope on the passenger seat and his phone propped against the dash, and the particular sensation in his chest that he recognized as the physical form of understanding that something has already been set in motion, and the only remaining question is whether you can get there in time. Sejin's last move. Not the room, not the documents, not the confrontation. He had already known the room was lost when Tae-hyun walked in with the envelope. His last move was older than this morning. It had been sitting in that building, waiting. The city moved past him. He drove with both hands on the wheel and his eyes forward, and the specific pressurized focus of a man who has exactly one thing he is pointed at: the facility. And whatever Hong had been sent there to do. He had 40 minutes, maybe 35 if he pushed it. He pushed it. The Dobong-gu facility was a 4-story concrete building that had operated as a private medical research annex in the early 2000s and had been nominally decommissioned in 2014 when the syndicate transferred its record-keeping to digital storage. It still had power, a basic maintenance connection, and the upper floors had been used intermittently for storage. It sat at the end of a service road behind a light industrial area, flanked by a chain-link perimeter fence that was technically locked and practically not. Tae-hyun arrived at 34 minutes. Sung-min's advance team, 3 men, had arrived 6 minutes earlier and had the ground floor cleared. One of them met Tae-hyun at the entrance. "Second floor," the man said. His name was Ryu. He was holding his left arm slightly away from his body. "Hong has 2 people with him. One of mine went up and didn't come back down." "Chang?" "Yes." Tae-hyun looked at him. "Is he alive?" "We think so. He would have been useful to them as long as they needed to know what we knew." Ryu's jaw was tight. "Hong knows you're here. He heard the cars." "What's on the second floor?" "Old lab space, medical storage. There's a room in the back. It was the facility's controlled substance storage originally. Solid door." "Hong's been up there since this morning." Ryu paused. "The materials Sejin mentioned. We don't know what they are or what he brought with him, but the room has a ventilation system that connects to the floor above." Tae-hyun looked at the stairwell, looked up. "The floor above?" he said. "Yes." He thought about what Sejin had said, things that were never removed because no one knew they were relevant. The specific precision of that phrasing, not weapons, not personnel, medical materials, things Hwang had stored when the facility was active. He thought about the 2 contractors Park had flagged. Medical interference. He thought about Amara. And then, in the specific way that a mind under pressure makes connections it would make more slowly otherwise, he understood what the ventilation system was for. "Get everyone out of this building," he said. Ryu stared at him. "Sir, everyone, ground floor, outside past the fence line. Right now." He was already moving toward the stairwell. "Call Sung-min and tell him to get Amara out of the safe house. Different location, his judgment, and tell him what's in this building." "What is in this building?" Ryu said. "I don't know exactly," Tae-hyun said. "That's why I need everyone out of it." He took the stairs. The second floor was dim. The maintenance power ran the lights at about 40%, enough to see but with shadows in every corner. Old lab benches along the walls, most of them empty. The smell of a building that had been closed for a long time. Dust, old plastic, something faintly chemical underneath everything, like a low note in a piece of music. The corridor was a long straight run to a heavy door at the end. Sung-min's man Chang was sitting on the floor beside the door, zip-tied at the wrist to a fixed pipe fitting running along the baseboard. He was conscious, His head came up when Tae-hyun came around the corner, and he had a cut above his left eye that had bled down the side of his face and dried there. Tae-hyun crouched beside him. "How many inside?" "Two," Chong said. His voice was slightly thickened. "Hong and one other. The other one has medical equipment. I saw it before they put me out here." He swallowed. "Whatever they're setting up in there, so it was meant to run on a timer." "A timer." Tae-hyun looked at the door. "How long ago did they start?" he said. "I've been out here about 40 minutes, Chong said. "Maybe 45. Tae-hyun stood, tried the door handle. Locked. Not standard, something heavier. He looked at the wall beside the door. The ventilation panel, about head height, mounted in the concrete. Old screws, old housing. He had no tools. He had his hands and his jacket and 30 seconds of thinking time. He took off his jacket, wrapped it twice around his right forearm. Then he stepped back and drove his elbow into the ventilation panel at the corner joint, where the housing met the concrete. Once. The panel buckled. Twice. It gave at the corner. 3 times, and the housing pulled free of the wall with a shriek of old metal swinging loose. The smell that came out of the vent was not chemical the way he'd feared. Not airborne, not yet. Which meant whatever was in there was still in a contained state. Still time. He shoved his hand into the vent housing and found the release lever for the interior panel by feel. Old facilities like this always had maintenance access from both sides. It was a code requirement from the era when this building was constructed, and pulled. The release lever broke off in his hand, rusted through. He stood there for a second with the broken lever in his fist. From the other side of the door, a sound. Movement. Then Hong's voice, muffled but audible through the heavy door. "He's in the corridor. Move the timeline up." Tae-hyun dropped the lever, looked at Chong. "Close your eyes and turn away from the door." Chong turned away without asking questions, which was the correct instinct. Tae-hyun took 3 steps back down the corridor, picked up one of the old lab stools from the nearest bench. Metal frame, heavy, the kind of equipment that was built in an era when things were built to last, and came back at the door with everything he had. The first impact shook it. The second buckled the frame. The third, he felt it in his shoulder all the way up into his neck, broke the lock housing out of the concrete anchor on the right side, and the door swung inward with a sound like something tearing. The room was small, long bench running down the center. 2 men. Hong was the one near the door, a compact man in his 40s who moved fast, already moving when the door came open. The second man was at the far end of the bench with his hands on a piece of equipment that Tae-hyun could not fully process in the half-second he had before Hong was on him. Hong hit hard. Former military, from the way he moved, economic, no wasted motion, aiming for the throat on the first strike. Tae-hyun took it on his left shoulder instead, turning into it, and used the momentum to pin Hong's arm and drive him sideways into the bench. The bench edge caught Hong across the lower back, and he made a sound, not a cry, a grunt, the specific compressed sound of real pain, and his grip broke. Tae-hyun was already past him. The second man had the equipment in his hands and was looking between the door and Tae-hyun with the expression of someone recalculating very fast. He was not a fighter. That was clear from the way he was holding the equipment, from the particular way he'd stepped back when the door broke open, from the fact that his hands were shaking. "Put it down," Tae-hyun said. The man looked at him. "Put it down," Tae-hyun said again. Behind him, Hong was getting up. Tae-hyun did not take his eyes off the man with the equipment. "You came here to do a specific thing," Tae-hyun said. His voice was steady, which cost him something because his shoulder was sending specific urgent messages up his neck and his heart was running fast enough that he could hear it. "That thing is not going to happen. The man who sent you is in custody. The documentation he was trying to destroy is in my possession. There is no version of this morning in which you complete what you came here to do." A pause. "But there is a version where you walk out of this building." The man's hands were still shaking. Hong hit him from behind. Shoulder, same spot, clearly intentional. And Tae-hyun went forward and caught himself on the bench edge with both palms. And the impact ran up his arms and into his chest, and he tasted something metallic at the back of his throat. He pushed off the bench and turned. Hong was 3 feet away and bleeding from his lip. Somewhere in the last 30 seconds he'd taken a hit that Tae-hyun hadn't tracked, and his eyes had the specific quality of a man who has decided he has nothing left to lose from this encounter and is operating on that decision. "Seijin is finished," Taehyun said to him. Hong swung. Taehyun moved inside the swing, took the forearm across the back of his shoulders, and drove his elbow into Hong's solar plexus with everything he had left. Hong folded. Not completely. The man was built to absorb punishment, but enough. He went to one knee. Taehyun grabbed him by the collar. "Finished," he said again, breathing hard now. "Whatever he promised you, money, protection, whatever it was, it's gone." He's in a room right now with every senior director in this organization, explaining 15 years of decisions. He felt Hong's hands try to find leverage on his wrists and tightened his grip. "You can fight me for the next 10 minutes and accomplish nothing, or you can put this down and tell me what was in that equipment." A long moment. Hong's hands stopped moving. In the silence, the second man, the one with the shaking hands, set the equipment down on the bench with a sound that was almost gentle, a careful sound. The sound of someone very relieved to put something down. "It wasn't activated," the second man said. His voice was thin. "The sequence hadn't started. I hadn't—" He swallowed. "It wasn't activated." Taehyun looked at him. "Step away from the bench," he said. The man stepped away. Taehyun straightened. His shoulder was going to be a problem in about an hour when the adrenaline finished with him. His hands were steady, which was the thing that mattered right now. He looked at the equipment on the bench, looked at it properly, now that he had a moment to process what he was seeing, and understood, with a cold and specific clarity, exactly what Seijin had sent these men to do. Not to him. Not to the organization. To Amara. The ventilation system. The timer. The connection to the floor above where the building's central air handling ran. If this building had been Amara's location, if they had moved her here instead of the Seongbuk safe house, which they might have done if circumstances had been slightly different, if Seijin's information had been slightly more current, then the thing on that bench would have been something else entirely. He stood in the dim room and breathed. Then he took out his phone and called Sung-min. "She's safe," Sung-min said before he could ask. "Different location, 20 minutes ago. She's safe." The breath he let out was not controlled. It was just a breath. "The facility is secure," Taehyun said. "I need forensic documentation of what's in the room on the second floor before anything is moved. And I need the two men in here transported, separately, no contact with each other, for processing." "Understood," Sung-min said. "Taehyun, your voice. I'm fine." "You don't sound—" "I'm fine," he said. "How is she?" A brief pause. "She's sitting at a table in the new location eating something that one of my people got from a convenience store. She asked me to tell you, and I'm quoting directly here, tell him I said this location has worse natural light." Something moved in Taehyun's chest, despite the shoulder, despite the taste of metal in his mouth, and the way his hands were starting to feel the morning in their bones. Despite the room he was standing in and the bench and everything that had almost happened. He almost laughed. "Tell her I'll be there in an hour," he said. He ended the call. Looked at Hong, still on one knee, not moving. Looked at the second man near the wall. Looked at the room. Then he walked back to the corridor, crouched beside Chang, and broke the zip tie on the pipe with a two-handed pull that finished what the morning had started with his shoulder, and helped the man to his feet. "Can you walk?" he said. "Yes," Chang said. "Then let's go," Taehyun said. They went down the stairs and out into the gray soul morning, and behind them in the building on the second floor. The documentation of 15 years of patient, careful, monstrous planning. Sat on a bench in a room that smelled of dust and old plastic, waiting to be recorded. He sat in his car outside the new safe house for 4 minutes before going in. Not because he was hesitating, because his shoulder had stiffened on the drive over and he needed to move it carefully before he got out of the car, and because he wanted to be composed when he walked through that door. Not performing composure, not the controlled face he wore in the conference room or at the facility, but actually settled, actually present. He was aware that those were different things and that Amara would know the difference. He breathed, moved his shoulder, got out of the car. The new location was a ground-floor apartment in Eunpyeong-gu, older building, quieter neighborhood. Sung-min's man at the door, a young one named Baek, who had been with the organization for 2 years and who stepped aside without a word when Taehyun approached. He went in. Amara was at the kitchen table exactly as Sungmin had described, a triangle of kimbap on a convenience store wrapper in front of her, half eaten. She had her hands around a bottle of water, and she was looking at the window, not through it, looking at the glass itself, the way people do when they're thinking about something specific. She heard him come in and turned. She looked at his face, then at his shoulder, the way his jacket sat slightly wrong on it, the angle he was holding his arm, then back at his face. "You're hurt," she said. "It's minor." That's what people say when it's not minor, but they don't want to talk about it. He sat down across from her. Same configuration as that morning. The table between them, the two of them on opposite sides of it. But the quality of the air in the room was different from that morning. Something had burned through. The particular tension of waiting for something to happen had resolved into something else. Not ease, not yet, but the specific exhausted quiet that comes after. "The facility is secure," he said. "Sejin is in custody. The documentation is complete." He looked at her. "It's over." She looked at him for a long moment. "Is it?" she said. "The immediate threat is over," he said. "What comes after? The organizational accounting, the formal proceedings, the restructuring. That takes time. But you're not in danger. The child is not in danger." He held her gaze. "That part is over." She looked down at the kimbap wrapper, smoothed a corner of it with her thumb. "I've been sitting here," she said, "for the last 2 hours, trying to decide how I feel about the fact that I am a person who now knows what it's like to pack a bag at 2 in the morning and move safe houses." A pause. "I'm an art conservator, Taehyun. I restore damaged silk panels. That is the level of drama that was supposed to be in my life." "I know. And now I know what a fabricated blackmail package looks like. I know what it means when someone says medical interference in a professional context." She looked up. "I know what it means that someone found the address where I was sleeping." "Yes. That was one of your people," she said. "The address. Someone in your organization gave it to Sejin." "We identified who," he said. "It's been handled." She looked at him. The question of what handled meant lived briefly in the space between them, and then she seemed to decide consciously not to ask it. Not because she didn't want to know, but because she was making a choice about what she could hold right now. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Okay." "When Park told me this morning that Sejin had found the safe house address, in that moment, before Sungmin confirmed you were safe," he stopped. Organized. He was not good at this, had never been good at this. And the morning had made him rawer than usual in ways that were visible in the slight roughness at the edges of his voice. "I understood in that moment that the thing I have been most afraid of in this situation is not the organizational consequences, not Sejin, not the exposure." He looked at her directly. "It's losing you. And I want you to know that I understand what I did when you came to my door, and I understand what it cost you, and I am not going to ask you to make any decisions right now. But I needed you to know that." The kitchen was quiet. Amara looked at him for a long time. At his face, at the shoulder he was holding wrong, at the small cut on the back of his right hand from the ventilation panel that he hadn't noticed until she looked at it, and he followed her gaze. "Give me your hand," she said. He put his hand on the table. She got up and went to the kitchen, came back with a piece of paper towel dampened from the tap, and sat back down and cleaned the cut on his hand with the specific careful attention she brought to damaged things. Not gently, exactly, because the paper was rough and the cut stung, and she didn't pretend otherwise, but precisely, thoroughly. He sat very still and let her. "I'm not forgiving you today," she said, without looking up from his hand. "I want to be clear about that. What happened at your apartment, the glass, what you said, the way you looked at me. I'm going to be carrying that for a while. I know. But I also know that what you did this morning," she paused, finished cleaning the cut, held the paper towel folded against it for a moment. "I know what that was." He said nothing. "You drove to Dijon at 6 in the morning," she said. "You sat across from a grieving old man and asked him to give you something that might hurt you as much as it helped you. You walked into a room full of people who had reason to doubt you, and you presented the truth in a way that didn't give them a way out of it." She looked up. "And then you went to that building." "Yes." "For me," she said. "Yes," he said, "and for the child. And because it was the right thing to do. All three at the same time." She held his gaze. That's actually a more honest answer than I expected, she said. I'm trying, he said. She almost smiled. Not quite. The weight of the morning and the last several weeks was too present for a full smile. But the corner of her mouth moved. A small specific thing that landed in him somewhere important. She put his hand down, sat back. I need to go back to my apartment, she said. I need to sleep in my own bed and go to work on Monday and tell Jian whatever version of events she's willing to accept. I need some period of time that is just normal. Can you give me that? Yes. And I need to know that the normal is actually normal, that there's no one watching my building or tracking my phone, or the active protection can be reduced to something minimal and non-intrusive, he said. Until the organizational restructuring is complete, I'd ask you to keep something light in place. One person, no interference. After that, he paused. After that, however you want. She looked at the wrapper in front of her, smoothed the corner again. Come to dinner next week, she said. He looked at her. Not a negotiation, she said. Not a decision about what this is, just dinner. You come to my apartment and you sit at my table and we eat something that isn't convenience store food, and we talk like two people who are trying to figure out what they are to each other. She looked up. Can you do that? Yes, he said. Okay. She stood. Started folding the wrapper with the tidy automatic movements of someone who keeps spaces clean out of habit. Now go get your shoulder looked at. It's bothering you more than you're showing, and I can tell. He stood, picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. Amara, he said. She looked at him. Thank you, he said, for not leaving, for opening the door when I called, for... He stopped. The full weight of what he was trying to say was too large for the sentence he was constructing, and he could feel it. For telling me the truth even when I didn't deserve to hear it the way I did. She looked at him for a moment. I told you the truth, she said, because it was the truth. Not for you. A pause. But I'm glad you're starting to understand the difference. He left. Outside, the morning had moved into early afternoon. Seoul's particular gray autumn light, the kind that made everything look like a photograph of itself. He stood beside his car for a moment and breathed the cold air and felt his shoulder and thought about dinner next week. Then he called Sungmin and told him to take the rest of the day. The formal proceedings took 11 days. Sejin was held within the organization's structure, not law enforcement, not yet, though that conversation was coming. While the documentation was reviewed by the full senior leadership, every director, every operational chief with standing. Lim oversaw the review with the meticulous thoroughness of a man who had been waiting 30 years for the organization to do something correctly and was not going to allow shortcuts. Park Yun-seo compiled the complete record, the financial chain, the court archive reference, the original findings document from Daejeon, the recorded conversation with Hong, and the forensic documentation of the facility in Dobonggu, the equipment, what it had been designed to do, the testimony of the second man, whose name was Seo, and who cooperated fully and immediately in exchange for terms that Tai-hyun left to Lim to negotiate because he didn't trust his own objectivity in that conversation. Hong cooperated on the third day. Not fully, not gracefully. He gave information the way a man gives blood, in controlled amounts, calculating each disclosure against what he understood about his position. But he gave enough. The picture that assembled itself over those 11 days was not surprising in its outline. Tai-hyun had understood the shape of it from the moment Park named Sejin. But the detail was something else. The precision of it, the patience, the number of small decisions Sejin had made across 15 years, each one individually invisible, that in aggregate had been a sustained and comprehensive effort to manage the future of the organization through the management of one person's belief about himself. That was the thing that kept surfacing in Tai-hyun's mind during those 11 days. Not the anger. The anger was there, had been there, was probably going to be there for a long time, but underneath the anger, something more specific. The recognition that he had not simply been deceived about a medical fact. He had been shaped. Every choice he'd made about what to want, what to expect, what kind of future was available to him, all of it had been built on a foundation that someone else had constructed for reasons that had nothing to do with him. He didn't know what to do with that exactly. It was the kind of thing that didn't resolve into an action. It just sat there and had to be carried. On the 8th day, he went to see Sejin. Sejin was being held in a secured apartment. Not a cell, not anything resembling conventional detention, but a space with no outside communication and with Sung Min's people at the entrance. He had been given books. He had asked for them on the second day, which Tai Hyun had approved without comment, because the request was so characteristically Seijin, precise, contained, oriented toward maintaining some form of routine, that refusing it would have been petty in a way Tai Hyun didn't want to be. He was sitting at the room's single table with a book open when Tai Hyun came in. He closed the book when the door opened. He looked at Tai Hyun with the same composed expression he had worn in every room in every context for every year Tai Hyun had known him. Tai Hyun sat down. For a moment, neither of them said anything. "You wanted to run it," Tai Hyun said finally. "That was what this was. Not protection, not stability. You wanted the organization." Seijin looked at him. "I built it," he said. "Before your father, before you. I was there when it was nothing." His voice was even. "I watched your father take what I built and name it after his family. I watched you inherit what I built and be told it was your birthright." A pause. "I'm not asking for your sympathy. I'm answering your question." "And the diagnosis?" "Was a mechanism." Seijin said it with the flatness of a man stating an engineering principle. "Without an heir, your position was never fully consolidated, which meant the question of succession was always open, which meant I remained necessary," Taehyun said. "Yes." Taehyun looked at him. At the composed face, the even voice. The book closed neatly on the table with a finger still marking his page. Still marking his page, in the middle of this conversation, because Seijin was the kind of person who kept his place even in the ruin of everything. "I was 19 years old," Taehyun said. "I was in a hospital bed. I had just survived someone trying to kill me." "Yes." "And you sat beside that bed and watched them deliver that diagnosis and said nothing." "No," Seijin said. "I arranged it. I was not merely present." A pause. "I think you knew that. I think you're asking not because you need confirmation, but because you want to see if I'll say it directly." Taehyun said nothing. "I'll say it directly," Seijin said. "Yes. I arranged it. I sat beside that bed, and I watched it happen, and I said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The arrangement was already complete." He looked at Taehyun with the specific tiredness of a very old clarity. "I have thought about that moment many times over the years. I don't believe I would make a different decision. That is probably the most honest thing I can tell you." The room was quiet. Taehyun looked at him. At the face he had trusted and read his wisdom for 20 years. At the hands that were folded on the table, the same hands that had guided him through decisions he now understood had all been made in the shadow of a structure built to serve one purpose. "The organization will determine what happens to you formally," Taehyun said. "Lim is leading that process. I've removed myself from the decision because I'm not able to be objective, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise." He stood. "I came here because I wanted to ask you one question, and I wanted to hear the answer from you directly." Seijin waited. "Did you ever consider," Taehyun said, "that there was a person on the other side of what you did? Not an heir, not a succession problem, not an organizational variable. A person who was 19 years old and being told something false about his own body, and who was going to spend 15 years making decisions based on that, and who was going to meet someone and lose her and find her again and come within—" His voice changed slightly. "Controlled it. Did you consider that?" A long pause. "No," Seijin said. It was the most honest thing the man had said in 20 years, and they both knew it. Taehyun left. He did not see Seijin again. But the formal accountability proceeding concluded on the 11th day with a unanimous finding by the senior leadership. Seijin was stripped of his position and all associated standing within the organization. The financial records and the complete documentation package were turned over to a civil attorney with instructions to pursue available legal remedies. A limited step, carefully bounded, but a step outside the organization's internal structure, which was itself a change that Lim had pushed for and Taehyun had supported. Hong and Seo were processed through the organization's established channels for contractors who had operated against organizational interests. Taehyun did not involve himself in the specifics of that process either. The inside man, the person who had given Seijin the safe house address, was a mid-level logistics coordinator named Cha, who had been receiving payments from Sejin's personal accounts for 3 years. He was 28 years old and had a mother in a care facility in Busan, whose expenses he had been unable to manage on his salary. Taehyun reviewed his file personally and made a decision that surprised Sungmin. Cha was removed from his position and the organization's employ permanently, but was given a settlement sufficient to cover the care facility for 2 years and was told to leave Seoul. Sungmin had stood with the file in his hands and looked at Taehyun. He gave them the address where Amara was sleeping, Sungmin said. I know, Taehyun said. He did it to keep his mother alive, and he made a terrible choice to do it, and those two things are both true. He looked at Sungmin. Remove him, but don't destroy him. He made a choice I understand, even if I can't forgive it. Sungmin hadn't pushed back. He'd filed the paperwork and said nothing else about it. Taehyun had thought about it for several days afterward. The specific discomfort of understanding how a person could arrive at a decision he couldn't accept, and the fact that understanding it didn't resolve the discomfort. That was something he was carrying alongside everything else. He was getting accustomed to carrying things. Dinner was on a Thursday. He arrived at 7 with a bottle of wine he had asked a sommelier to recommend because he did not know what paired well with whatever Amara was cooking, and he had refused to guess. She opened the door in the same gray sweatshirt from the night he'd called her at midnight, which he recognized, and she looked at the wine and then at him. That's a very serious bottle, she said. I was uncertain what was appropriate, he said. I made doenjang jjigae, she said. He looked at the bottle. It'll be fine, she said, and took the bottle and let him in. The apartment smelled like the stew, and like the cedar from the wool blanket, and like something faintly chemical that he eventually identified as a conservation solvent she'd used on something earlier in the day and hadn't fully aired out. It smelled, specifically and unmistakably, like where she lived. He stood in the entrance for a moment while she went to the kitchen and looked at the shelf of broken-spined reference books, and the line of river stones on the windowsill, and the headset from the lab sitting on the desk, because she'd brought work home and felt, unexpectedly, almost disorienting in its directness, something that he recognized after a moment as a kind of rightness, the specific feeling of being in a place that is correct. He sat at the table while she finished the stew, and they talked about Ji-eun, who had apparently accepted the explanation that Amara had been managing a family situation with a broad and deliberate lack of follow-up questions, which Amara described as Ji-eun's particular gift. They talked about the silk panels, which were progressing. They talked about a new acquisition at the collector's gallery, a set of ink-wash paintings from the same period, water-damaged along the lower margin in a way that was technically solvable but would take time. They did not talk about Sejin or Hong or the facility in Dobonggu or the 11 days. Not that night. Those things were present in the room the way everything that has happened is present in a room between two people who were there for it, but neither of them reached for them. She served the stew and he ate it, and it was genuinely good. Not restaurant good, specifically home good, the kind of food that has been made by someone who knows what they like and cooks accordingly without performing it. My mother made this, she said at one point, not as context, just as a thing that was true. Where does your mother live? He asked. Atlanta. She's been there my whole life. She looked at the stew. I haven't told her yet. About... She gestured slightly. Any of it. What will you tell her? The truth, Amara said. Eventually, when I know what the truth is from front to back. She looked up. She's going to have a lot of questions. About me specifically. About everything, but yes, about you specifically. She looked at him with a directness that was entirely her. She's going to ask me if you're a good man. The question sat there in the quiet of the kitchen. What will you tell her? He said. Amara was quiet for a moment. She turned her spoon in the stew slowly. I'll tell her you're trying to be, she said, and that's more honest than most answers I could give about most people. He looked at her. That's more than I expected, he said. Don't make it into more than it is, she said. It's an honest answer, not an endorsement. I understand the difference, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then, for the first time in the whole span of this, the penthouse and the glass and the hospital in Daejeon and the conference room and the facility and all of it, she smiled at him. A real one, tired and warm and slightly unguarded. the kind that happens when a person's face forgets to be careful for a moment. He felt it settle somewhere that had been cold for a long time. 3 months later, Seoul let go of winter. The city did it gradually, the way it always did, a week of false warmth, then cold again. Then one morning, where the light came in at a different angle and something in the air had shifted, and you understood that the cold was going to keep retreating now, that the direction had changed. Amara was 7 months along. She had told her mother in February, a phone call that lasted 2 hours, and which she described to Tae-hyun afterward only as comprehensive, with a tone that suggested she was not ready to give him a fuller account. Her mother had apparently asked to speak with him. That call was scheduled for the following weekend, and Tae-hyun was, by his own private assessment, more nervous about it than he had been about the confrontation with Si-jin, which was information about himself that he chose not to examine too closely. He had moved most of his operational functions to a smaller space. The penthouse remained, but 3 nights a week he was at a different apartment, closer to Amara's neighborhood, that he had rented for reasons he did not initially explain to Sungmin and did not need to. He and Amara were not living together. The dinner on the Thursday had become dinners, plural, and then evenings that extended into early mornings, and then a gradual, unannounced, mutually unacknowledged increase in proximity that neither of them had formally named. That was fine with him. He had spent 15 years learning to live inside a particular kind of silence. He could learn a different kind. The organizational restructuring continued. Lim had stepped into a coordinating role that gave the senior leadership more collective weight in major decisions, Tae-hyun's idea, suggested in the 3rd week after the proceedings, which had surprised the room. Not because it weakened his position, but because he had proposed it himself. He had thought about Se-jin's words, "I built it," and about what it meant for an organization to have been built on the premise that one man's judgment was the only judgment that mattered, and he had proposed the restructuring because he understood, in a way he hadn't before this, that certainty about one's own correctness was its own kind of corruption. Si-jin's legal proceedings were ongoing. The civil attorney was methodical, and the documentary record was thorough, and it was going to take time, which was fine. Time was something Tae-hyun had learned to understand differently in the last several months. He had also started doing something he hadn't done before. He visited Dr. Yoon, the specialist in Mapo, once a month. Not for medical reasons, for the conversation. Dr. Yoon was 70 years old and had spent 4 decades watching people receive information about their bodies that changed how they understood themselves. And he had a perspective on that Tae-hyun found useful. They talked about the nature of diagnosis, about what it meant to have built an interior life around a fact that turned out to be a construction. It was not therapy, Tae-hyun would not have called it that, but it was something, and it was something he was choosing to do, which was different from the choices of the last 15 years in ways he was still mapping. He had not told Amara about the visits to Dr. Yoon. He would, eventually. I was practicing this behavior before announcing it, which was, he recognized, backward from how people usually did things. He was working on that too. On a morning in late March, Amara called him at 6:45. He was awake. He had been awake since 5:30. He slept less than he used to, which the doctor said was stress, and which he privately thought was something closer to his mind being unwilling to go fully offline when there were things still unresolved. He answered immediately. "I think it's time," she said. Her voice was steady, which was so specifically Amara. Steady at 6:45 on the morning that everything changed, that he was already out of bed and reaching for his keys before she finished the sentence. "I'm coming," he said. "I know," she said. "Tae-hyun." "Yes." A brief pause. He could hear her breathing, slow, deliberate, managing it. "Drive carefully," she said. He drove carefully. He also drove faster than was strictly consistent with carefully, and he arrived at her apartment in 11 minutes, and she was standing in the entrance with her bag already packed and her coat on and her hand on the doorframe, and when he came up the stairs she looked at him and said, "You look terrified." "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. "So do I. Let's go." The private maternity suite was on the 4th floor of a hospital in Mapo, not the clinic where Dr. Yoon worked, a larger facility, arranged months in advance by a physician. Amara had selected herself after interviewing 4 candidates with the same methodical thoroughness she brought to restoration assessments. The labor was long, 11 hours, which the nurses said was not unusual for a first child, and which felt to Tae-hyun, sitting in a chair beside Amara's bed and being alternately useful and entirely useless in the way that people are in those rooms, like an amount of time that existed outside normal temporal experience. He had negotiated, over the preceding months, for permission to be in the room, and Amara had granted it with the caveat that if he said anything about strength or bravery, she would ask him to leave, so he didn't say those things. He said other things. He held her hand when she wanted it held and stayed quiet when she wanted quiet. And when she said, at hour 9, with the specific stripped-back honesty of someone who has been in sustained pain for a long time, "I'm so tired," he said. "I know, I'm right here," and didn't add anything to it because there was nothing to add. The child was born at 8:41 in the evening, a girl. They put her in Amara's arms first, which was correct. Taehyun sat beside the bed and watched Amara's face in the moment when she looked down at the child for the first time, watched the specific transformation of it, the way a person's face can do something in a single moment that their whole previous life has been building toward. And he felt the full weight of everything that had been taken from him and everything that had been returned, and he did not try to manage it or contain it or put the controlled face on it. After a while, Amara looked at him. "Come here," she said. He moved to the side of the bed and she transferred the child into his arms with the careful specificity of someone who works with irreplaceable things and knows exactly how to handle them. And he took the weight of her, the particular specific impossible weight of something so small, and looked down at the face of his daughter. She had Amara's mouth. She had, he thought, and then was certain, the specific shape of his own father's eyes, an inheritance he hadn't known was possible to pass forward, a thread he hadn't known he was connected to. She opened her hand. Her fingers were extraordinarily small and completely formed, and they opened against his forearm and found the cloth of his sleeve and held. He stood there. All of it was present in the room. Hwang Jae-soon, who had been not strong enough. Se-jin, who had built a careful empire of control and watched it come down in 11 days. The 19-year-old in the hospital bed who had been handed a lie and lived inside it for 15 years. The glass against the marble wall. Amara in the rain on his doorstep. The old man in Daejeon with the manila envelope. The facility in Dobong-gu. The conference room. All of it. 15 years of constructed absence. Of a future someone else had decided he wasn't entitled to. His daughter's hand tightened on his sleeve. A reflex. She didn't know she was doing it. He looked up at Amara. She was watching him with the same tired, warm, unguarded expression that had first appeared on that Thursday in her kitchen, but deeper now. More layers in it, more of everything in it. And she looked, specifically and exactly, like herself. Like the woman who had stood at his door in the rain and told him the truth, even knowing what it would cost her. Like the woman who had told his security people to call him. Like the woman who had said, the morning after the facility, tell him Se-jin doesn't know who he picked the wrong fight with. "She looks like both of us," Amara said. "Yes," he said. "What do you want to name her?" They had discussed names, months of discussion, lists that Amara had vetted with the same methodical precision she brought to everything and that Tae-hyun had contributed to with varying degrees of usefulness. There was a name they had circled back to twice without formally deciding. "Seo Yeon," he said. Amara said it quietly, testing it. "Yes," she said. Seo Yeon, clear and distant, a name for someone who would not be defined by the darkness that preceded her arrival. He had thought about that when the name first surfaced, about the fact that she would grow up knowing or eventually knowing something of what her existence had cost, and the importance of her having a name that carried none of that weight. A name that was simply hers. He looked down at her again, at the hand holding his sleeve. He thought of what Se-jin had said, "I don't believe I would make a different decision." The flat certainty of it, the composed absence of regret. He had thought about that sentence many times over the past months, not because it angered him, or not only because of that, but because it was such a complete and specific window into a particular kind of person, the kind who looked at the cost of their choices and counted only what they gained, who never turned the calculation around. He was going to make different calculations. He had already started. He thought of the doctor's appointment he'd had the previous week, where Dr. Yoon had said something that had stayed with him. The people who altered your history didn't take away who you are. They delayed you finding out. Taehyun hadn't responded to that immediately. He'd thought about it on the drive home and several times since. He was still thinking about it. He thought it was true. In the way that things are true when they're too simple sounding to be sentimental, but you keep coming back to them anyway. Taehyun, Amara said. He looked up. Sit down, she said. You've been standing there for 20 minutes. He looked at the chair beside the bed. You can hold her and sit at the same time, she said. He sat down. His shoulder, the one from the facility, which had turned out to be a partial rotator cuff tear that he had ignored for 10 days before a physician had made him get it imaged, gave its familiar complaint at the movement, which he ignored. He sat with his daughter in the chair beside the bed. Outside the hospital window, Seoul moved through its evening, lights coming on, the distant ordinary sound of a city doing what cities do, unconcerned with what was happening on the fourth floor. The kind of indifference that is somehow exactly right. The world not pausing, not marking it, just continuing, and in the middle of that continuation, this specific room with its specific people and this child who had been called impossible for 15 years. Amara's hand found his arm. Not his hand, his forearm, resting on the arm of the chair. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. They sat there, the three of them, in the particular quiet that follows an ending and precedes everything else. He had walked into this story as the man who ruled something. He understood, holding his daughter in the yellow light of a hospital room while the city moved outside and Amara's hand rested on his arm, that what he was now was harder to name and more worth being. Not good. He was not going to call himself good. That was a word that required other people's accounting, and he had enough humility now to understand that the accounting wasn't finished, but present, honest. Willing to sit in the chair beside the bed and hold what needed holding without reaching for control. Seo-yeon made a small sound, not a cry, something smaller, a sound of adjustment, of a person encountering the air, and her hand tightened again on his sleeve. He tightened back. That was enough. That was exactly and completely enough.